Hello, friends. Welcome to the very first episode of the Comic Book Couples Counseling Podcast YouTube page. I'm your co-host, Brad Gullickson. The lovely lady Lisa will be joining us eventually, but I'm going to kick these things off because guess what? Lisa is not that big of a movie fan, and I am a movie maniac. And what you see before you is the Blu-ray to the 1985 action classic Commando, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. I grew up a massive Arnie fan. When I was like 8 years old, I tricked my grandfather into letting me watch Predator on HBO late at night. And from that moment forward, I just became an Arnie maniac. And thankfully, my parents eventually let me go down that very gory, bloody odyssey. And I will be forever grateful to them. And Commando, for the longest time, was easily my favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. And to this day, ranks very, very high. I think I would probably go with Predator still as my favorite, followed closely by Conan the Barbarian and then Commando. But of all the Arnold Schwarzenegger action movies, Commando is certainly the most ridiculous. And I think it has the highest body count. Something like 116 dudes get obliterated over the course of this movie's short runtime, just 90 minutes. So if you're an action junkie, it's a requirement. You have to check out this film. But you're going like, Brad, I'm here for comic book talk and not movie talk. And so why am I looking at this Blu-ray to this old 1985 action movie? Well, first off, you're a comic book maniac, and you should know that the first screenplay for Commando was written by Jeff Loeb, who would go on to write Batman the Long Halloween, which is probably the greatest Batman comic, according to Brad and Lisa. For Marvel, he would do Spider-Man Blue, Hulk Gray, Daredevil Yellow, Captain America White. There's probably fewer fans of Captain America White than the others, but all the Tim Sale collaborations are great. He's also the guy who, along with Ed McGuinness, did the Red Hulk storyline, which I have a fondness for as well. But, you know, he began life as a Hollywood screenwriter, and, you know, it would serve him well in these early days, cranking out these scripts. It would hone his skills, and he would go on to write Genius in the four-color realm. And, you know, he would also be the guy who would shepherd in those Marvel tie-in shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And Inhumans. Okay, the less said about Inhumans, the better. I'm getting distracted, but so there you go. Jeff Loeb wrote Commando, or at least the first draft. Eventually, Stephen D. Souza would go on and revise it, and what you see on screen is mostly de Souza's work. Loeb's storyline radically differs from what you see in the movie. But that's not the only reason we're talking about Commando, because I discovered a few weeks ago, thanks to the Twitter account @CoolComicArt, that there is actually a Commando movie adaptation. And yeah, that blew my mind. And I had to go to eBay and get myself a copy, and boom, there you go. The Commando comic book adaptation. All right, why is this amazing? One, it's a Commando movie adaptation. Two, it is illustrated by Marc Silvestri, who, along with Chris Claremont, delivered some of the greatest X-Men storylines of all time in the late 80s. To this day, he might be my go-to Wolverine illustrator. Obviously, we love what John Byrne did. We adore what Jim Lee would do, especially the way Jim Lee drew Wolverine in Punisher War Journal. That might be my favorite Wolverine. But overall, Marc Silvestri's my Logan guy. And to see him do an adaptation of Commando is really, really special. And I thought we could just go through this comic book together. Now, where did this comic book come from? Actually, it came from Diamond Comics. What is Diamond Comics? Well, Diamond Comics is associated with Diamond Toys. Not the Diamond Select toys that you know of today, but the 80s toy line that produced cheesy not knockoffs, what's the right word, but like pretty basic action figure designs of movie adaptations like Commando. The Commando toy line has almost nothing to do with the movie other than having the Arnold Schwarzenegger figure, but all the bad guys have almost nothing to do with the film itself. And with those toys came these comics, this little adaptation, and you can buy the toy and the comic mint in box for a lot of money. If you just want the comic book, like me, you can find the comic book for fairly cheap. I got this one for $10, although right now, as of the recording of this video, most of the ones that are on eBay right now are going for about $30, but you know, have the patience of a spider for all you Usagi Yojimbo fans out there. If you have the patience of a spider, you can end up getting this comic for a relatively cheap price. So this is 1985, right? Marc Silvestri has not yet done his work with Chris Claremont on the X-Men. He has started publishing work with Marvel Comics at this point in time. He did a couple issues of King Conan in the early 80s, I think 82, I want to say. So this work is not as great as what he's going to become, and it's certainly not to the level of his talents towards the end of his X-Men run and the early days of his creator-owned comic book, Cyberforce. He was one of the founding fathers of Image Comics, along with Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Jim Valentino, Hank Canals. Shout out to Hank Canals. So the quality is not quite to the top tier yet of Marc Silvestri, but that's okay. That's okay. So shall we crack this bad boy open? Somewhere, somehow, someone's going to pay. The action-packed story of Colonel John Matrix. All right, I love this cover. We crack it open, and the comic book doesn't have as much space as the film, so it's got to do a lot of the exposition fairly quickly. And we see here Colonel John Matrix, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and his daughter Jenny, played by Alyssa Milano in the film, feeding a deer. And this sequence is seen during the credits of Commando, and it's maybe one of my favorite frames from that movie because it's just absolutely ridiculous. It's so idyllic, so absurd, but it really just speaks to this unbelievably pleasant life that Matrix and his daughter are having up in the woods in their cabin, away from the awfulness of society. They're feeding deer together. They're having ice cream. They're swimming in pools. It's just perfect. It's a perfect life. But that's all about to be disrupted. In the film, before this, actually, we have the setup where all these soldiers or ex-soldiers are being assassinated by Bill Duke, who plays Cook, and Vernon Wells, although there's a little trick there because Vernon Wells' character, Captain Bennett, used to work with Matrix. And so they make it look like Bennett has been murdered as well, but actually Bennett is in on it. But we don't get any of that in the comic book. What we get is the arrival of Colonel Matrix's former boss, the general here. He's sporting a mustache. That is not the case of the movie either. So we're just going to have to deal with those differences. It's okay. We can take it. The colonel goes away. He flies off in his helicopter. Colonel Matrix says, like, don't worry, Jenny. I'm sticking with you. We're not going to worry about what's coming. We can deal with it. But then we have action. The villains arrive with their machine guns, their M16s, their revolvers, and they start blasting away. And the two guards that the general left behind are immediately taken out. Schwarzenegger goes through, obliterates the villains that are on their way. He goes looking for Jenny because he threw Jenny into the house. And this scumbag is waiting there, has Jenny's teddy bear, and no, Jenny. You will be reasonable and do as we say, right? And he goes, wrong, and he punches him right in the face. And we get that great nose break there, provided by Marc Silvestri. In the film, he does not punch this guy in the face. He puts a bullet right through his forehead. The chase begins. We don't get the action scene where they've ripped out all the wires from his truck, so the truck's not working, and he has to push the truck down the mountainside to gain momentum on him. We don't have time for that, so we have just Matrix driving the car in high-speed pursuit. He collides with the Jeep. They exchange gunfire, and they kidnap and capture Matrix. And we see here in this warehouse, we got Bennett, with a really cool evil Spock goatee. And they're telling him, look, we need you to fly to Valverde and assassinate the president of Valverde so that this guy over here, this guy leaning here, this guy here. Actually, no, that I think is supposed to be Sonny. Well, Dan Hedaya, he plays Arius, and he wants to be the new ruler of Valverde, and they need to get rid of the old ruler for that to happen. And so they want Matrix to be their assassin. And if they don't have Matrix kill this president, they're going to kill Matrix's daughter. So they get him on the plane. They're flying to Valverde, but before the plane can take off, Matrix punches this guy, knocks him out. Again, in the comic book, he breaks this dude's neck, totally incinerates the guy, or at least incinerates his tiny little neck bones. And then he gets on the wheel, jumps off, starts his watch. It's very much like Escape from New York with Snake Plissken. You have to have a timer with these kinds of movies, or Spy Kids 3D, which took that concept from Escape from New York. And he is going after Sonny, or no, not Sonny. I apologize. Sully, played by David Patrick Kelly in the film from The Warriors. Come out to play. And he's tracking Sully because he knows that Sully will take him back to Bennett. And he's, they're leaving the airport. Sully makes some cat calls towards this character, Cindy, played by Ray Don Chong in the movie. And then Matrix, in the film, rips the chair out of her car and forces her, he kidnaps her now, to trail Sully. And they go on the hunt for him. Mountain Road, very much like the film. They collide, knocks Sully out of his car, and then we have one of the most iconic moments in the film, Matrix holding Sully by the ankle over the cliff, right? And he's like, I'll talk, Matrix. She's on General Arias' secret military base. It's on an island off the coast of Santa Barbara. The latitude and longitude coordinates are... wow, he knows all the latitude and longitude coordinates. But we don't get to see how does that scene end, because in the comic, Matrix comes back to the car, tips the Porsche back on side. Cindy's like, hey, what did you do with Sully? And he's like, I let him go. Well, it doesn't really go that way in the comic because, he made a promise to Sully, Matrix did, saying like, I'm going to kill you last. And Sully in the movie reminds him, hey, remember Matrix? You told me you were going to kill me last. And then Arnold goes, I lied, and then drops him off. The one-liners in Commando don't always make sense or don't always snap the way that they do in, say, a Tango and Cash, which is 100% one-liners. But they have their own particular charm, and I'm disappointed to see that the graphic novel doesn't have the I lied moment, but it does have the I let him go moment. So already we're at the end of the film in this comic, because we're skipping over the moment where John Matrix gets all the weapons and steals all the guns out of the armory, and Ray Don Chong uses the rocket launcher to free him from the paddy wagon. We're going right to the military compound of Arius, and they've hijacked a plane. She's going to hang back. Cindy's going to hang back with the plane while Matrix goes out there. And this is the page you've all been waiting for, because this is the moment where Matrix tools up in the movie. And check out that really wonderful Silvestri stance. I wish we had a little bit more time to have the inserts of him putting the knife in, getting his grenades, locking and loading his machine guns. But instead, we're just gifted this really beautiful Marc Silvestri stance. And I approve. He goes about the compound, putting up explosive devices in key areas, and then he hits the button, and it's go time. Boom, boom, boom. Arias and Bennett are made aware of his presence. Obviously, Matrix was not their assassin. It's time to kill Jenny. Jenny escapes. Bennett goes after Jenny. He captures Jenny in the steam room, this very like Freddy Krueger-like boiler room in the basement of the mansion. And Matrix is already caught up with him, right? Let her go, Bennett. It's me you want. And in the film, there is a really prolonged knife fight sequence between Vernon Wells and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it is glorious. In the film, it's maybe one of the most macho sequences I've ever seen put into film. It's grotesque in its testosterone, but I love it so much. For the comic book, though, all we get are 1, 2, 3, 4 panels, and it doesn't even end the way that it does in the movie, because again, it's a comic book paired with a toy that they're selling to children, and rather than Matrix jamming a pole right through the sternum of Bennett, impaling the boiler behind him, he just punches him, and Bennett knocks his head on the boiler and cracks the boiler. We do get a hiss of steam, and he can still give the one-liner of, "Go ahead, Bennett, let off some steam." And then Jenny's like, "Oh, Daddy, you saved me." And yeah, here we are. This is the end. The general shows up with his helicopters, but Matrix has already taken care of it. Matrix has saved the day. He's rescued Jenny. He's returned to Cindy. And all we got are these two soldiers having this conversation, which I think is pretty great. "Wow, it looks like an earthquake, a tornado, and a typhoon all hit the island at once." And then the general says, "Yes, soldier, an earthquake, tornado, and typhoon all rolled up into one man, Colonel John Matrix Commando." The end. There you go. That is the Commando graphic novel in all of its glory. I hope you had a good time hanging with me in this comic book. If you have not watched Commando, don't worry. This book did not spoil it. You should go out and seek the extraordinary violence of this 80s action film. In a lot of ways, I feel like Commando is the ultimate 80s action film. Everything you think you've heard about, or anything you would want to see in another action film, it all happens in 1985's Commando. It's a perfect time capsule of this era, of this particular genre in cinema. Highly, highly, highly recommend. I'm probably going to watch it later tonight. Yeah. So there you go. Marc Silvestri, thank you so much for illustrating, for taking this job and giving us one of the most unique comic book adaptations of all time. And I would love to hear from you listeners. Post down in the comments what you think is the greatest comic book adaptation of a movie. There are so few good ones in the world, and I don't know if I would put Commando as the number one. I tend to think about Rick Veitch and Stephen Bissett's adaptation of Steven Spielberg's 1941, a terrible movie, but actually a pretty good comic book. There's Bill Sienkiewicz's Dune adaptation, 3-issue series for Marvel. What's another really good one? I don't know, but those are probably two of my favorite. I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think are the best comic book movie adaptations. The first comic book I ever purchased was actually Marvel's adaptation of RoboCop 2. I need to pull that out of the long boxes. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to bring you more videos. Lisa will join us. Please be sure to follow her on Instagram and Twitter at Sidewalk Siren. You can follow the podcast at CBCC Podcast. You can email us, cbccpodcast@gmail.com. And you can follow me on all social medias at MouthDork. Please like and subscribe, share, tell your friends. We're going to be doing some more walkthroughs of comic books and toys and all kinds of nerdy things. So without further ado, thanks guys. Take care.